Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. And again, like I said, there'll be a number of folks that are texting and jumping in as we go along. I thought what I would do is a mixture between a report and an update on some exciting efforts that have been underway around the three pieces that you see on the screen now. And we'll get into a little bit deeper. And please do not hesitate to unmute yourself, ask a question, throw an idea. I'm going to probably call a couple of you out into the conversation a little bit. If we can finish before 11, I promise I'll do my best. This year, 2022, has really been what I refer to as a building year, putting the rest of the pieces of the blocks together, engaging with a number of you on the phone and others in sharpening how and where this focus on resilience should go, and also looking at how each of your different organizations, technologies, projects fit into the strategy that I'll share. And most importantly, what is it that we can be doing collectively to address some of the challenges that you'll be reminded of in a moment. So let me jump into this if I can. And I need not remind any of y'all, about the challenges. And even Alan Tratner, one of our executive mentors and partners who's out in Hawaii, some of you may have heard him say, is seeing the outcome of an additional set of disasters in the way of what he's seen in the way of the lava flow and such. But these are the areas that we have focused on. We added, and you'll see this in a moment, areas around cyber. We have been hesitant to do that, but you'll hopefully understand why we added this element in this collaboration on cyber. You all know that this has really been kind of the two pieces, kind of bookends that have driven the focus on pre-disaster and risk mitigated resilience. The amount of these losses that have really accumulated since 1982 and literally have accelerated for multiple reasons, have accelerated just in the past 5 to 7 years. Part of it driven by the intensification of these tropical storms becoming hurricanes, which leave people, communities, businesses with less time to prepare. But the other, end of the equation is that between the work done by Wharton up at the University of Pennsylvania, the National Academies, Columbia, Lars, your work in Alabama, and others across the country, we now know that there is a 1 to 6 or better cost benefit if we invest ahead of the curve. If we put the technology, the equipment, we use the data tools, we help citizens, communities, and companies, not just on the idea of a checklist of being prepared, but to really make the investment. So that's what's been driving this. And as you all keep track of the different reports and studies, there's been several gatherings this year, some that I've had a chance to participate in, like Lindsay and her team, which pulled together as always, a phenomenal event in Dallas for the annual gathering of the Urban Land Institute. So a lot of folks, a lot of minds, a lot of capacity being focused on all of, these two bookends. And then, of course, one of the issues that I was in Austin yesterday, meeting with a number of folks, and one of the things that we are still kind of adjusting to, so to speak, is that these are no longer a disaster recovery, rebuild, get a chance to take a breath, and then hopefully not have to deal with it for a while. These are these billion-dollar plus events that are stacking one on top of each other. There are certain places in Julie with PACEMA, who I'll introduce in a little bit, the Private Sector Emergency Management Association. Julie knows this. Justin Noakes from HEB, others know this. The issue is we still have multiple locations in the United States that have multiple presidential declarations in some form of activity, either finally getting approved, in stages of approval, and then along with that, at the same time, we're trying to adjust to what we've learned from COVID. But what we looked at and continue to look at is the economic, financial, societal, environmental, the whole context of what's happening here. And I apologize. Sometimes I realize that some of these graphics get a little bit blurry, so I'll promise to get the updated version. But something that I wanted to emphasize as a part of our expanded view in working with each of you is if you take a look at the green diamonds up on the upper right section quadrant here, you'll see kind of the typical ones that we're all aware of, right? These natural disasters, these climate related, water and weather. If you'll take a look at that diamond versus the diamond down here, it says data fraud or theft. We're not focused, not because it's not important, but I felt as an organization and as collaboration with you all, we are not focused on, the medical clinic that gets hit, 20,000 records of patients are taken and send me a Bitcoin and I'll give you the key back. We are focused on the fastest growing area of insurance and reinsurance and greatest concern now, and that is the operational cyber attacks, some of which are occurring simultaneous to the natural disaster events. So I wanted you to be aware that we announced about 2 months ago, partnership with Building Cybersecurity, which was founded by Lucian Niemeyer. Lucian is a longtime friend, still based in Washington, D.C. Lucian was the one of the chief of staff of the U.S. Senate Armed Services, went over to the Pentagon as head of facilities and infrastructure as the assistant secretary, wrapped up on over at White House OMB, Office of Management Budget, and then launched upon quote unquote retirement, Building Cybersecurity. And you can see the explanation down there on the screen, and I'll get you all copies of the slides. But the fact is that a growing threat in its own right, but simultaneous to the natural disasters, are rogue interest turning on and turning off a number of pieces of equipment, public services, whether it's water or power. And I wanted to highlight very simply that in one of the gatherings that we were a part of, if you'll look at this graphic snapshot overhead view at the bottom, I'll just make it pretty simple. This is one of the inner channel ports of one of the largest multi-state ports, let me put it that way, and you can see the number of cargo containers there. If you go to the left of that, that is a major highway. There is a railroad track, and then you see a major airport. So for those of you who are trying to sort out, okay, Richard, give up the hoot, tell us what this is. This is Newark Airport. And what's happened now is that while we were looking at, as a country, intermodal, multi-state ways of operating transportation delivery, what's now happened is this has created one of the largest vulnerability issues on everything from storm surge to freezes to attacks on cyber related, and they have been hit. So if you want to shut down a major part of the economy, this is a interesting way to try to do that sight unseen. And what you also don't see, by the way, is part of that Colonial Pipeline that travels adjacent along with other pipelines. So our goal that has been front and center for everything that we've been doing through the guidance and counsel of a lot of y'all, if not all of y'all, I have jokingly said over and over again, I've got a government English degree from the University of Texas, which qualifies me to be the mayor of nothing. But what our entire intent here has been to change the delta in risk mitigation, to truly change the conversation about risk and not look at this as solely a risk transfer. I've got a risk, I buy an insurance policy, or I set up some type of fund within my company, whatever it may be. But we felt all along and learned from our conversations with the Insurance Information Institute, the Reinsurance Association of America, the Property Casualty, different folks, that this model is just not sustainable. And so what we've been looking at is, as you all know better than I do, there's a lot of data, a lot of information, down to very, very crystal clear locational data about the previous losses and what the impact of those losses have been. But we also now know that there is, and represented on this call, are a number of folks who have technology, equipment, data science, new practices, new ways of designing infrastructure, and not just retrofitting previous, but also the new design of buildings. It's pretty clear, Lindsay, from the Urban Land Institute gathering that this includes housing, multifamily, this is industrial, large-scale industrial facilities. So our objective with you all through 2022 and now moving into implementation in 2023 is to actually show the delta, which is measurable in financial terms and other types of impacts, that if I've lost $10 million previously, I redesign, retrofit, build differently, design differently, use technology appropriately, then can we now, which we can, measure the future reductions and finance those future reductions in ways that are beneficial across multiple interests. So our resilience model that we've been working on, that I feel we have now completed structurally, is bringing these three pieces together that I wanted to share and get some feedback and talk about some of the partnerships and collaborations that are underway for 2023. The Innovation Hub, we feel that that's the ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem, networking with great individuals and great organizations like Charlie Sidoti up in Chicago. I'm sorry, Boston.
Boston. I was going to say Boston.
Sorry. My geography, I need 2 more cups of coffee. Paul Robinson and the great work that he's doing in Norfolk and the Hampton Roads area and others. So that network, that collaboratory network, that ecosystem will continue to engage and move forward in some additional expansion that's underway in Florida and in the Midwest. I'm going to skip the Resilience Lab and focus for a second on the ROAR partnership, which I'll introduce a little bit more to as we go forward. But these three pieces have kind of come together as a nonprofit The venture lab is what I call the middleware, and a commercial entity to do these private philanthropic public partnerships. So what does this all mean when you really start trying to implement it? We have continued in 2022, which we will continue to do throughout 2023, is to engage, not just thought leaders, but individuals that have significant insight on implementation. Some of you were able to join us for Carolyn's rollout of her new book. Many of you knew Carolyn from Wharton and the Risk Center there. She's now joined the Environmental Defense Fund and is doing some pretty phenomenal things there. Carolyn is very interested in continuing to work with us. The recording for this is available, but we'll continue to bring some of the best minds, best thinkers, not just on reports and strategies, but really focusing on how do you ultimately convert it to implementation, to boots on the ground, all right? These are the different activities that we've had underway with the hub. Some of them are at different stages. Not all of them are at a stage that could be done simultaneous. So there's pieces of this that are at different stages of formation and different responsible parties. We never felt that the hub, this network, should try to take it all on as responsibility, but to try to identify collaborative partners and others to get behind and support. But I want to highlight a couple of things here and a few announcements that we are making, and then a few others that we'll make along the way. One of the areas that we have made significant progress this year is around the Resilient Citizens Corp Initiative. The concern that I had was that you could have all the technology, all the equipment, all the data tools in the world to go out and deploy on any scale of infrastructure in any type of facility, any kind of operations. Here's the problem. We don't have the workforce. And that's an issue across the entire country. So we felt that there was an opportunity to really connect with community colleges, technical schools, other education training interests, civic institutions, chambers, low to moderate income focused community organizations, and bring them together. This is not just about police, fire, and EMS. And that's not to be sound like that's judgmental. It's that there's so many other new jobs that require skill sets around resilience that have been identified. And so this is the kind of the test bed that we got moving this year in Houston. And we think that this is actually it's a template or a model. It's not one that should be replicated in its specific fashion. All this needs to be tailored to the local needs. But this is really coming together around the benefit of a community college, technical school, but also reaching out to the four-year institutions, the high schools, the chambers. This gives you an idea of what's underway. So the two elements I wanted to share with you is Bonnie Canal, who's been one of our executive mentors from New Orleans, has agreed to step up and be our national director of the Resilient Citizens Corp. That's been something she has as a background. There's a couple of organizations that we are in discussions with now about working with each of you to identify where there are new training and certification programs that are required. As a part of this initiative in Houston, JP Morgan Chase's foundation, through the local regional office here, but this has actually reached back to senior headquarters, obviously to Jamie Dimon and the leadership there. I'm going to kind of do something I'm not supposed to do, but tomorrow it'll be a little bit more publicly announced. But they have made a commitment, not a over-the-top commitment, but a commitment to form the Regional Resiliency Workforce Collaborative around this whole initiative. And by doing that, JP Morgan is bringing 32 of their other funding organizations that they put resources behind in Houston to connect in so that you really get a leverage. We think that this is at about 250 to 300 organizations that now will be quickly impacted into the training and certification in this. And we think that this is something that should be looked at and applied across the country with each of you and your organizations, as well as the technology companies that are interested in our discussion. So now let's get into part of the additional elements that we've been working on. On the phone with us are a number of technology companies. There are over 40 companies over the past 2 years that we've had a chance to engage with, one-on-one, group sessions. These are companies that have been referred from not just some of you on the phone, but Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, others, to look at how they can get engaged in this pre-disaster and risk mitigation goal that we have. So we are looking at 4 areas: prop tech, insure tech, green tech, and smart tech. But we're not trying to replicate what these 4 quote unquote buckets are already doing. What we're looking at is how to integrate any number of the technologies into a platform, meaning that it has become readily apparent that a technology that's dealing with property tech probably has a smart tech component behind it and may be eventually applied towards something in sustainability and green. And what we have realized in some of my work over the past 40 years is kind of just, being applied here, is to take a look at individual technologies as a standalone opportunity, but also to determine where 2 or 3 technologies that may not know about each other, if they were to integrate as a package, would be even more powerful for the market and solve problems. The connection point to this is that, and you'll see this in a few more minutes, what we want to be able to do is package technology, equipment, data tools, other services into these regional resilience repositories. Because one of the continued challenges and failures of every after action report has been the failure of the supply chains. The worst thing you can do, and that's the reason why I am so pumped to stand behind and support Julie in her efforts around the Private Sector Emergency Management Association, PSEMA, P-S-E-M-A, and their work to connect with the private sector to drive more and more of their engagement and leadership in pre-disaster and preparedness. And it's represented by organizations such as HEB Grocers, OnStar, Esri, and others. But the whole idea of what is on your screen now is that we believe that there is an opportunity to step up and engage with growth stage technology, equipment, and data science companies into these integrated platforms, but also to provide access to packaged resources that are needed, private sector, corporate campuses, academic, university campuses, and even the public sector. We announced this very, very softly, but part of what the work of 2021, 2022 has been has, in building this, was to take a look at where there is a need to create a new project development, kind of a new governance, and even a new investment financing model. And so I was encouraged to create a P4 entity, private philanthropic public partnership, and that is the ROAR partnership, Resilience Opportunity Advisors and Resources, which is a commercial entity. And that focus, you can read faster than I can, has been to actually take a lot of the work that's being done by you all under the hub in some of these other activities and really get now to a level of implementation in 2023. So part of the role that connects the dots and where the Resilience Venture Lab, we hope, will play that role, is that the ROAR partnership looks at these technology and equipment data science companies in ways that I want to make sure are very open and transparent. ROAR partnership will not ever have an exclusive relationship with any of the technology, equipment, and data science companies. We believe it's fair, open. We know what ROAR wants to focus on and where it wants to focus on. Everybody and anybody that wishes to connect and leverage that equipment, technology, and data science tools, full after it. This is how we think that this needs to be approached under the ROAR partnership in delivering certain services and certain project development. So as we look at what's been underway with the hub, what is now being put together with ROAR, one of the challenges that we recognized is that capital is not the issue. It really usually is not the issue, all right? Capital is not the issue, okay? What is the issue is it's so damn fragmented. It has different requirements, rules, regs, a whole set of different unique, request and eligibility. But folks, it's not a capital issue. And so what we felt was that this was now a time to look at all of the different array of resources, private, philanthropic, public, different revenue streams, and actually begin to identify a way to pull this together into these new types of investment vehicles, and also how to establish, frankly, the application of that financing at a project level within communities, around facilities and infrastructure. So in doing that, we started listening also to what the insurance industry has been discussing. And as an example, many of you have heard about this, but when we go back to this idea that there is a 1 to 6 or better cost benefit return on investment, what we would be able to do is not only measure that, but then to begin to determine how to finance it. And so over the past year, legislation has been moving multiple. There are over 18 different pieces of legislation in Washington at different stages, all focused on either addressing gaps or frankly reforming the Stafford Act, which guides not just FEMA, but a lot of the other federal agency programs and financing and grants and contracts. But what the Reinsurance Association took a leadership role on was to be able to say, look, there's more money on the private sector side. There's more non-governmental financing that could be applied to this, if but for the lack of a new financing model, a new approach, a new framework. So legislation has cleared the Senate. It's cleared the key House committee. We hope that it'll move through the lame duck session and get to the White House sometime before the year's over. But if it doesn't, it means the whole legislative process is starting right back again. But we decided, with the encouragement of a lot of organizations, a lot of technology companies, a lot of investors, not to wait. And so what you're seeing is where the opportunity exists are in 832 census tracts across the United States that are defined as most at risk. So if you take a look at the left-hand side of the screen, I know it's somewhat difficult to read, but if you take a look at what it says here, most at risk are locations in the United States that have had repeated back-to-back disasters. And these are everything from wind, tornado, wildfire, avalanche, you name it, the top 12 to 15. We now know where all of this is occurring. We know it now to a census tract level. What's the other side of the screen at the bottom there is social vulnerability, low to moderate income, and economic transition areas. So what we've looked at is how to bring those two pieces together, most at risk, most in need, all right? And ultimately, how can you target the resources, the technology, the equipment, the data tools that need to be deployed in these locations to really change the risk model that I mentioned at the earlier. So we are now actively moving forward, having spoken with about 15 members of Congress, 2 Senate, and the balance of House members, about doing pilots to establish a framework, not in absence of or, against FEMA or any of the federal agencies, but frankly, to bring the best of the private sector, the best of philanthropy, the best minds together into building out a framework of how all of the pieces that we're talking about and have talked about, and that each of you in your own way are contributing to, all right? Which leads to a strong belief that while LEED certified is a great program that the Green Building Council has obviously taken a significant leadership and success in, the challenge, to be very blunt about it, and this is not out of turn, people have heard me say this, including some of the folks around the Green Building Council. The challenge is that LEED certification tends to be a one-off. It tends to be based on an initial design, construction, delivery. What we've heard and what we have recommended is a new standard, a new designation called Future Proofing America that would occur every 18, 24 months on facilities, infrastructure, operations within communities that are showing and proving out continuously that they are doing all that's possible to make their facilities, their employees, their communities even more resilient to future perils, future disasters. So in that regard, what we started towards over the past couple of years now is how do we connect technology, equipment, data, best practices with alternative investment, alternative resources, including new tools. And that is really what this past year, through the 14 investor forums that we did. Now, you see a picture in the middle. God love it. The last time that we did an in-person investor forum was now 2 years ago plus. We are going to return in February, which will roll out the date here in a little bit, but we are going to return to an in-person investor forum in later February next year. But this whole set of the investor forum, which has been recorded, and hopefully some of you will get a chance to go back and listen to any and all of the sessions, included these lightning rounds that we started doing 2.5 years ago, which was an opportunity to introduce some of the technology companies that are on with us now, some that not able to make it. But it really has focused on not your typical, pitch session. Everybody's looking for money. There isn't anybody on this call that ain't looking for money, all right? What we want is the technology, equipment, and data tools to be able to describe what they do, what the impact is, how it gets deployed, and really what they need outside of money, because that's obviously, again, a part of this, but to connect the dots on how your product, your service can ultimately change the risk model that we've talked about. But it's also a forum to set up and engage the insurance, mortgage banking, traditional financing, private equity, crowdfunding into a whole set of new investment vehicles. And through the work of a number of you, including some of the work that Paul Robinson and his folks are doing under their grand challenge at RISE in Norfolk, this is gaining lots and lots of traction across the country of saying, wait a minute, we're not using and allocating our resources as efficiently and effectively as we can. So here's the Venture Lab. We felt that it was now time to package all of the activities around the investor forum, the lightning rounds, into an active venture lab. But I want to describe this for a moment, be mindful of time. So I'm going to take 5 more minutes and then I'll open it up for questions and comments and observations or critiques. We're not going to run cohorts. We're not going to run what Mass Challenge, Impact Hub, Generator, Techstars, individual programs that are represented by organizations on this call with us. That's not what we're doing. There's no need for us to go run a whole set of new cohorts. The reason why we call it a cohort application and cohort session, however, is we are already in discussions with a number of the folks that I mentioned as existing regional and national accelerator and incubator programs. So if a technology, equipment, data tool has already successfully gone through an accelerator or incubator cohort, we want to work with their alumni, go back, reach back to the alumni, and identify where their products and solutions may actually either pivot or have a dual use benefit for the areas of resilience that we're talking about, all right? And to engage with the next generation of cohorts so that what we are through the Venture Lab is truly kind of the finishing school, the final step of market readiness, and frankly, accelerating into procurement, invoices, strategic marketing relationships, private equity, whatever the transaction model looks like. So if you, and I'll take a moment to do this to see if I can pull it up. See if it'll pull up in here. So give me a second. So if you haven't had a chance to go to the Resilient Venture Lab website, do so when you have a moment later today, but it gives you a lot of the information that I'm already sharing. But this is really what I wanted to share with y'all under the Venture Lab. And we are working with 3 or 4 folks that are going to help staff and support the Venture Lab in 2023. So again, we're not doing a cohort. We call it a cohort, we may rephrase it, but we're relying and looking to convene 12 to 18 companies every couple of weeks to put them through this last stage and introduce them into the marketplace and into project development where the technology could be embedded. It'll have the office hours and mentors. But one of the ways that we're looking at accelerating is, again, stepping up the use of the lightning rounds and investor forums that we've been doing in the past, all right? And how ultimately each of those companies could either stand on their own, as I mentioned, or be packaged with others, all right? There's an onboarding process that we've asked companies to begin to fill out. I apologize. Some of you have already filled out a form previously on the Resilience Innovation Hub. This is actually a lot more detailed without giving us anything that's proprietary, but giving us some sense of where your company is in the stage and the focus of that company, and what are some of the needs that you may need to actually now put it on steroids. So if you all have a chance to take a look at it, I would encourage you to look at the website. It gives you a lot of information. There may be other elements to it, all right, that need to be there. But as I mentioned, we'll be making some announcements, hopefully on the next 2 weeks, or we're just going to hold them until early January, with some of the national and regional incubators and accelerators who have already expressed interest, some of which have actually been feeding us companies and technologies. And for those of you who are technology, equipment, and data science companies, don't hesitate to reach back out to me for any questions and how this is going to unfold, hopefully, I think more efficiently and effectively in 2023 than where we've been at this point. The other last kind of big announcement, Jim Rao may be on the phone with us, but a number of us have been working this past year. We are in the stages of, and for purposes, I would encourage you to read the right-hand side of the screen so that I don't get myself in trouble. But we've had an opportunity to talk with a number of insurance, reinsurance, alternative investing, venture interest across the country about everything that we've just shared with you. And what we are in the stages of now doing, and Jim Rao is on, and you can text with him in the chat. But Jim and his team have a very, very, what I would call robust platform that allows all of us through that platform and through the formation of this Innovation Fund 1 to be able to help you, your company, or the companies that are in your portfolios or in your communities to have access to different types of funding. And so that infrastructure, all digital, all compliant with SEC, IRS, Treasury, all the different compliances that are required are all digitized. And because Jim's company is already, compliant, SEC approved, FINRA approved, it helps us move faster to work with general partners and limited partners and others interested in financing the projects and the elements that I've shared with you, including individual companies and in areas of the resilient zones that we talked about. So a lot to consider, a lot of information available, probably a lot of overload as I normally do, but let me go back to the Venture Lab and open this up to questions, thoughts, pushback, and hopefully what our intent today is to plant some seeds as you're beginning to wrap up your year, look into your crystal ball for 2023 to determine how you would like to partnership, strategic partnerships, alliances, with this, but most importantly, I am begging for people to exploit the tools and the resources that you've seen today. I'll pause and open it up to questions, and if nobody asks questions, I'll start bringing some folks into the conversation. Anybody?
As a result of some of these relationships, there's going to be a new set of supply chains that emerge from these relationships that'll be very much integrated, intertwined, and intertangled with one another. If you looked at the new set of challenges that we will face in terms of resiliency of interdependency of those different components of those supply chains on one another.
So, Robert, I'll introduce you to the group. Robert is a part of our effort around the resilience zones to tackle urban farming, urban agriculture. I'm actually a keynote speaker next week in Charlotte at a very interesting gathering around food and health as it relates to resilience. Robert, you know this better than I do, and that's one of the issues that can only be really, really resolved at a hyper-local level. And again, reason why we're looking at these resilient zones, and through your advice and counsel and others, the interdependencies between making sure that I'm fortified from that my building, my facility, my home, the surrounding neighborhood is fortified. I've said this, Robert, very openly of late. I can build you the biggest, deepest moat with the meanest, most fierce alligators in the world. And we can do that. There are people on this call who are already doing that, who are supporting that. We can do that. The failure is that once I've literally disaster-proofed you, the challenge is, how do I actually encourage you to be a thriving family, community, small business owner? And so the connectivity or the links here are that we do not want to look at this as just future-proofing under this new designation of how well you are not just reducing your physical operations, infrastructure risk, but how you're also reducing the risk to employees, to homeowners within these jurisdictions. So, Robert, those interdependencies are very clear now. It's how we believe that taking the innovation expertise of those of you who are on the phone, those who will be listening in, and others that we've been talking with, and how to actually move it into these, into these community disaster resilient zones as platforms for implementation.
Hey, Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Professor Alan Tratner from Green to Gold, the incubator and the National Transition Initiative with the Resilience Hub. I just wanted to ask, there are all kinds of new technology. I'm thrilled to see that you have this funding hub, in a sense, Lab One. And, we were working on that, you and I, for a couple of years now. So I'm wondering, people like Mr. Rowe, et cetera, are you the gateway for all of that? Do you want us to come through you to make those connections?
Here's what we like to do. And Jim is listening in, and Jim, if you want to introduce yourself, what we are doing is we are not ready. Clearly, we are not ready to accept a investment into Fund One. We are informing each of you and others in the marketplace, as I have been doing the past 2 weeks, of the existence of the framework for the fund, how the fund would be used, what's the business model, and frankly, where are what we call the mission-driven returns on investment. So, Alan, for that purposes, what we will probably do is get through this call, and then those who want to learn more about the fund specifically, we'll set up a call for that. What I really wanted to do today is plant the seed for us moving forward in mid-January and in March around the Venture Lab. But to answer your question, Alan, I'm gonna follow up with everybody, including all that were invited. If you're interested in learning more about the fund, we'll set up a call for that with Jim and his team. As it relates to the Venture Lab, it'll be myself and a couple others that are going to lead the Venture Lab activities. Okay.
Great. And we're still going to do our initiatives reaching out to governmental funding, the Biden administration, my trips to the White House, et cetera. We're going to still do all that, right?
Yes. Oh, God, okay. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. This is perfect today.
Julie, are you still on?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
All right. Can you take a minute or two to introduce yourself, your great background, and as one of our new executive mentors, but also, frankly, I think it'd be great for you to take a minute or two and explain what PACEMA is.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. So very quickly, Julie Roberts. I have a background. I spent a couple different times in the federal government and then with the state of Florida. Have a background in private sector emergency management from a state perspective. About a year ago, created the new association called the Private Sector Emergency Management Association, which focuses on the business to business, helping business get back when a disaster happens. More importantly, on this front, how do we build a resilient business community? So met Richard about 10 months ago, and he joined PACEMA. And then I've been involved here with the resilience conversation. Did a lot of resilience work too when I was in Florida with Brian Kuhn as our director. So excited about where this is going and look forward to working with all of you. I put in the chat the PACEMA information for the website. If you're interested, please let me know. Full disclosure, website's undergoing some major updates right now. So some of the things aren't there, but we will be launching a new and improved website at the beginning of the year, but would love to chat with you guys. I will also put my contact information into the chat.
Great, Julie. Thank you so much. I want to, there's a couple of folks also that I want to introduce, and I don't want to put anybody too much on the spot. I want to introduce, let me see if, I'm not sure, Charlie, I know you're on. I think Paul Robinson had to jump off because I know he had a conflict. Paul Robinson, are you on still? Charlie, go ahead and quickly introduce yourself, and I'll also give a little bit of background on what Paul's working on.
I'm happy to speak for Paul as well. Just kidding. Charlie Sidoti, I'm the executive director of Inshore. Inshore, we are a nonprofit. Our mission is to foster innovation in insurance, but we take a focus primarily on the intersection of innovation, insurance, and climate risk, which we define as really two goals. One, how can we get the insurance industry to develop products and services that will accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy? And how can we get the insurance industry to build products and services that will incentivize investment into individual enterprise and community resilience? So we're very much focused on insurance product development, but kind of touching on all these things that Richard's been talking about, including a heavy focus on resilience.
And Charlie has really been a great mentor and partner who unfortunately I had to ghost and not get up to Chicago as I had planned.
Boston.
I'm Boston. Yeah, that's the problem, Charlie. I think
he was in Chicago. We were all in Boston.
Yeah. I forgot. You know, when did you move? Charlie is really through his work in Boston in Northeast has really been a collaborator in how do we make this pivot and this transition, and is also a source of technologies and market opportunities. Our friend Paul Robinson, who was on earlier at RISE in Hampton Roads, Norfolk, if you all have a chance to take a look, he has got one of his grand challenge initiatives underway. And again, this is one that is focused on crystallizing the relationship between technology, the built environment, large-scale projects, insurance and non-insurance investing in these areas of pre-disaster risk mitigation. So, Charlie, thank you, for your patience and others. Our friend Paul Taylor is on the call, and Paul, we have not formally established it yet, but Charlie, just for your purposes of where we're headed, Paul and his background give us a view on some of the Midwest states, Kansas and Iowa, and areas that have also been persistently flooded. So, Paul, thank you for coming on board as one of our executive mentors, and we'll be working with Paul in establishing our node in his part of the world after the first of the year. We are also finalizing in South Florida, in the Miami area, and we'll be prepared to share that with you maybe again before the end of the year, more than likely right after, our new node in our partnership with Joel Surface and his work underway in South Florida, which is really a national initiative because Joel, from Austin, serial entrepreneur, has spent the last 2 years as the innovator in residence at the National Renewable Energy Lab in Boulder and is now in Florida full time. So we've got a lot underway, and as usual, lots to get done. We look forward to working with Grace Rodriguez and the Impact Hub folks. We are, again, finalizing our discussions with Mass Challenge, with Generator and others. But hopefully this has made sense. And if you've got any questions, any thoughts of where we can continue to collaborate and work together. And last but not least, to those of you who I still owe phone calls and follow-up items, thank you for your patience. I promise that I have not forgotten, but we're getting there very, very quickly. Robert, you had one last quick observation comment? Robert?
I was actually trying to send a message to Paul before we hung up, so I can get his contact information.
Perfect. Yeah, we're going to share out lots of different information and put people in contact with each other. But again, if there are any observations, comments, insights, please jump in. A lot of work to be done, ambitious agenda. And I guess I'll end on this comment just because I love to poke the tiger a little bit. If you don't live in Texas, you don't know about H-E-B Grocers. You ought to look up H-E-B Grocers as an example of a corporate entity that has not only proven how to make their employees and their own operations resilient, but how to work with communities. And the great work that Julie and others like Justin are doing is showcasing how corporate America, private sector, small businesses, and philanthropy are really aligning around all of these opportunities to engage in a new model for resilience. So thank you all for your work, and we look forward to talking with you soon. And please contact us with any questions or comments.